There exists a television program that has been canceled on 2 separate occasions, taken to court multiple times, pulled off the air by its own network, targeted by the United States government, publicly ridiculed by virtually every other major animated series on television, and condemned as harmful by organizations representing millions of Americans. It is still broadcasting new episodes. For more than 25 years, Family Guy has accumulated adversaries the way other shows accumulate Emmy nominations: watchdog groups, federal agencies, rival creators, civil rights organizations, copyright attorneys, conspiracy theorists, a beloved entertainment legend who took the show to court, and a creator who very nearly did not live long enough to produce a single frame of it. Every one of those stories is covered here. 10 sections, 10 controversies, every one of them completely real, completely documented, and considerably stranger than most people remember. The first section covers the double cancellation, how Family Guy died twice, and why that is the most unlikely story in television history. Let us start somewhere most people are unaware of. Before Family Guy became one of the longest-running animated programs in American television history, before it surpassed 400 episodes, before it burrowed so deep into popular culture that people quote it without even registering that they are doing so, the show was dead. Not nearly canceled, not in danger of cancellation, but actually dead. Twice. And the sequence of events that returned it to life is genuinely one of the strangest things that has ever unfolded in the history of American broadcasting. Seth MacFarlane was 24 years old when he pitched Family Guy to Fox. He had spent time writing and animating for children's television, including a period at Cartoon Network, and had developed 2 short animated films, one of which featured a character named Larry and his dog Steve. He used those as the foundation for what would eventually become Peter Griffin and Brian. MacFarlane put together a hand-animated pilot he had largely made at home and presented it to Fox executives, who were impressed enough to commission a full series. The show launched on January 31, 1999, immediately following Super Bowl 33 on Fox, which gave it one of the largest possible audiences a series premiere could hope for. Tens of millions of people who had just watched the game stayed on the channel and encountered Family Guy for the first time. By early measures, the show had a genuine audience and a real future. Then the problems started. After that strong debut, Fox moved the show around constantly. It went from Sunday nights to Thursday nights, where it competed directly against Friends and Survivor, 2 of the most dominant programs on television at the time. That is an almost impossible situation for any show, let alone a brand new one still finding its footing. Viewers who liked Family Guy had trouble locating it from week to week because the network kept shuffling it around the schedule with little notice. Ratings declined, not because people had stopped enjoying the show, but because they simply could not find it reliably. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, there was no streaming and very few households had DVR. If you missed your program, you missed it. Fox canceled Family Guy in May of 2000 at the end of its 2nd season. Then, in a peculiar reversal, the network had a change of heart just 2 months later and ordered a 3rd season of 13 episodes. The show returned in the fall of 2001 and was placed on Thursday nights again, directly competing with Friends and Survivor once more. Ratings stayed low. Fox shuffled the show across different time slots, searching for somewhere it could find an audience. Nothing worked. In May of 2002, Fox announced its fall lineup, and Family Guy was simply absent from it. No farewell episode, no formal announcement. The show was just gone. Seth MacFarlane later said that at that point, he genuinely believed it was finished. He had tried other projects during the gap between the first cancellation and the 3rd season revival, and nothing had worked the way Family Guy had. Now it was over, and nothing suggested it would ever come back. What happened next is the part that changed television permanently. When Family Guy was canceled, Fox had already sold the rerun rights to Cartoon Network. So even though no new episodes were being made, old episodes began airing late at night on Adult Swim, which was Cartoon Network's programming block aimed at adult viewers. At the time, Adult Swim was one of the only places on television where adults could find animated comedy that was not made for children, and Family Guy fit in perfectly. The ratings on Adult Swim were staggering. The show went from being a struggling broadcast network program that viewers could barely track down to the most watched show on Adult Swim's entire lineup. Viewership grew by more than 200%. College students, young adults, and people who stayed up late found Family Guy in reruns and responded enthusiastically. The audience had existed all along. Fox had simply never put the show somewhere that audience could consistently access it. Then came the DVD situation, which is the part of the story that is genuinely difficult to believe in retrospect. In 2003, Fox released DVD sets covering the first 3 seasons of Family Guy. This was still relatively early in the era of television DVD releases. The Simpsons had demonstrated that people would purchase TV shows on disc, but no one was entirely certain how large that market really was. Family Guy's DVD sets sold in enormous numbers. The first season set moved more than 2.2 million copies, making it the second best-selling television DVD release of all time, behind only the debut season of Chappelle's Show on Comedy Central. The second best-selling television DVD of all time, for a show Fox had canceled because the ratings were not good enough. Fox executives began looking at those numbers and asking a very uncomfortable question. If this many people were buying DVDs of a canceled program, how many people had actually wanted to watch it when it was on the air? The answer, as it turned out, was considerably more than the ratings had suggested. The broadcast numbers had not captured the true size of the audience. DVD sales revealed that a substantial number of people had wanted to watch Family Guy, but had never been given a reliable opportunity to do so during its original run. In 2004, Fox made the announcement. Family Guy was coming back, new episodes, a full season order. The show that had been canceled twice and that MacFarlane had accepted was gone forever was returning to broadcast television. When Season 4 premiered in May of 2005, it drew over 11 million viewers, which was more than the show had ever achieved during its original run. The audience that had been built through Adult Swim reruns and DVD purchases showed up immediately, and they brought new viewers with them. The revival was not a modest second chance. It was one of the most successful returns in the history of American television. MacFarlane later reflected in interviews that the cancellations may have accidentally benefited the show. Animated series almost never receive a break. They simply keep producing episodes, season after season, until the writers are exhausted. The forced gap gave the creative team time to rest and return with a clearer sense of what the show was trying to be. Whether or not that explanation holds up entirely, the version of Family Guy that came back in 2005 was louder, more confident, and more assured than the one that had been canceled in 2002. There is a dimension to this story that tends to go underappreciated. The revival of Family Guy was not simply a feel-good account of a show beating the odds. It was an event that changed how television networks thought about their audiences and where those audiences actually lived. Before Family Guy, a canceled show with low ratings was a canceled show with low ratings. That was the end of the story. After Family Guy, networks began paying far more attention to DVD sales, to what was happening in syndication, and to where programs were finding audiences outside their original broadcast windows. The model that saved Family Guy, discovering a show in reruns, buying the DVD, telling friends, building an audience far from the original broadcast slot, became a template that eventually helped streaming services make the case that there was a massive market for content that traditional television had misjudged or mishandled. Netflix, Hulu, and every major streaming platform that built a business around rescuing overlooked programming owe something, however indirectly, to the strange and improbable comeback of a cartoon Fox had thrown away twice. The show also did something unusual upon returning. It addressed its own cancellation directly. Peter explains to his family that they had been canceled by Fox, runs through a list of other Fox shows that had recently been dropped, and proceeds to mock the very network that had just brought them back. MacFarlane had no interest in expressing gratitude about it. The show returned with a chip on its shoulder, and that attitude, the sense that Family Guy had nothing left to lose and no one to answer to, became part of what made the revival seasons feel distinct from the original run. MacFarlane described the show's standing in a 2024 interview using the phrase, "escape velocity." At a certain point, he said, the show had become so established and so financially successful that there was simply no compelling reason to stop making it. It funds causes he cares about, it continues reaching new audiences, and it clearly still means something to the people watching it. That is a remarkable thing to say about a show Fox canceled twice before it had been on the air for 3 years. The double cancellation story matters not merely as a chapter in television history, though it unquestionably is that. It matters because it tells you something fundamental about how Family Guy operates, which is always slightly outside the ordinary rules, always finding a way to survive situations that should have finished it off. The show was canceled twice and came back larger both times. It was sued repeatedly and prevailed. It was banned and kept going. It made enemies of nearly every other animated program on television and outlasted most of them. None of that starts without the cancellations. None of it happens without the improbable chain of events running from bad Fox scheduling decisions through Adult Swim late nights to DVD sales figures that left every executive in the building confused. This show should not exist. It should have ended quietly in 2002, unremarked upon and without consequence. Instead, it became something that changed how an entire industry thinks about where its audiences actually are. And if you think that story of unlikely survival ends there, if you think the network was the biggest enemy Family Guy ever faced, then you are unaware of the organization that spent years trying to get the show removed from the air entirely, filing complaint after complaint with the federal government, pressuring advertisers to pull their spending, and waging a very public and very personal war against Seth MacFarlane. That war is what the second section covers, and it is genuinely one of the most unhinged feuds in American media history. Section 2. The Parents Television Council versus Family Guy. The culture war that defined the 2000s. There is a version of this story where the Parents Television Council is the villain. There is another version where they are simply a group of people who sincerely believed a television program was harming children and pursued every legal avenue available to them to stop it. The full picture sits somewhere between those two versions, and it is stranger and more interesting than either tells it. The Parents Television Council, almost universally referred to as the PTC, was a non-profit organization founded in 1995. Their stated mission was to protect children from television content its members considered harmful. They reviewed programs, distributed newsletters alerting parents to specific episodes, organized letter-writing campaigns, and filed official complaints with the Federal Communications Commission, the government body responsible for regulating what can and cannot be broadcast on American airwaves. By the early 2000s, the PTC had become one of the most powerful pressure groups in the entire media industry. Networks paid attention to them. Advertisers paid attention to them. When the PTC selected a target, it was not something anyone could afford to dismiss. Family Guy became that target almost immediately. From the beginning, the PTC argued that Family Guy represented exactly the kind of content that had no place on broadcast television. They objected to the sexual humor, the violence, the dark material touching on religion, race, and disability, and above all else they objected to the format. Their argument was clear. Children are drawn to cartoons by instinct. If you place a cartoon on television in the early evening hours, children will watch it. And if that cartoon contains adult content that no reasonable parent would want a young child to see, then the network airing it is behaving irresponsibly, whatever rating they choose to display on the screen. Fox had given the show a mature audience designation. The PTC did not consider that sufficient. They argued repeatedly that the animated format made Family Guy uniquely dangerous because it attracted young viewers who might otherwise have no interest in adult live-action programming. A 10-year-old who would pass on a mature drama would sit down for a cartoon without a second thought, not knowing or not caring that this particular cartoon was made for adults. In May of 2000, during the show's second season, while it was already struggling with poor ratings, the PTC launched a letter-writing campaign directed at Fox, calling on the network to cancel Family Guy outright. They also claimed at the time that there was strong advertiser resistance to the show, using this as evidence that the marketplace itself was rejecting it on moral grounds. What followed over the next several years was one of the longest and most relentless campaigns any organization has ever mounted against a single television program. The PTC named Family Guy their worst show of the week on more than 40 separate occasions. They placed it on their annual lists of the most objectionable programming on television for the 2000, 2005, and 2006 seasons. They criticized Fox specifically for scheduling it during hours when children were most likely to be watching. They approached sponsors, companies including Wrigley and Burger King, and argued that these brands were damaging themselves by advertising alongside content that exposed children to inappropriate material. Some of those campaigns produced real results. Family Guy lost sponsors because of PTC pressure. That was a concrete, measurable impact on the show's business, not simply background noise. The FCC complaints are where the story becomes particularly remarkable. By the PTC's own accounting, they were responsible for generating the majority of FCC indecency complaints about television content during this period, and the complaints they filed and mobilized regarding Family Guy were numerous. The first formal FCC complaint about a Family Guy episode arrived in January of 2005, following a rebroadcast of an episode called And the Wiener Is. The FCC reviewed it and declined to act, concluding the content, while suggestive, did not meet the legal definition of indecent broadcasting. The PTC did not stop there. Over the following years, they filed complaints about episode after episode. When the 2009 episode called Family Gay aired, which depicted Peter being injected with what the show called a gay gene and subsequently entering into a relationship with another man, the PTC objected on multiple grounds and organized their membership to file complaints as well. The FCC received approximately 188,000 complaints about that single episode. That is not a typo. 188,000 separate formal complaints filed with a federal government agency about one episode of an animated comedy. The FCC reviewed the situation and declined to take action against Fox. In 2010, the PTC filed a complaint about the show's 150th episode, Brian and Stewie, arguing it contained material that violated federal indecency laws due to what they described as excretory content. The PTC president at the time, Tim Winter, made a public statement in which he said it appeared that Seth MacFarlane had carefully studied the precise legal definition of broadcast indecency and then set out to violate it as literally as he could. That statement tells you everything about where the conflict had arrived by 2010. The PTC was no longer simply objecting to content they found offensive. They were accusing MacFarlane of deliberately targeting the specific legal limits of what he could put on broadcast television, which, to be fair to the PTC, was probably not entirely wrong. The show entered the fight directly in 2005 with an episode called PTV. In it, Peter launches his own television channel after the FCC begins censoring everything on broadcast television following a wardrobe incident at an awards ceremony, a transparent reference to the real-world controversy surrounding Janet Jackson's Super Bowl appearance in 2004. The FCC in the episode eventually begins censoring everyday life itself, physically appearing inside the Griffin home to place black bars over body parts and bleep out words in ordinary conversation. MacFarlane said in interviews that the episode came directly from his fury at the FCC's increasingly aggressive approach to broadcast content in the years after the Janet Jackson moment. The episode also featured the Griffin family directing complaints to something called the Family Television Council, a thinly veiled version of the PTC, as a direct and very public dig at the organization. The PTC considered filing an FCC complaint about PTV itself, then apparently decided against it, recognizing that complaining to a federal agency about an episode mocking them for filing complaints might not reflect well on them. The episode was nominated for an Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. MacFarlane's most widely quoted statement about the PTC came in a 2008 interview with a magazine called The Advocate, when he was asked about the ongoing conflict. He compared receiving hate mail from the organization to receiving it from Adolf Hitler. He called PTC members literally terrible human beings. He observed that for an organization professing to uphold Christian principles, they spent their entire working day hating people. His final remarks were not fully printable in most outlets. The statement was picked up everywhere. It was not a measured press release. It was MacFarlane saying on the record what a large portion of the television industry had been thinking privately for years. The PTC had made numerous enemies in Hollywood through their campaigns, and the creator of Family Guy had just put into words, publicly, what many people felt but would not say. The irony that followed is one of the genuinely strange footnotes in the whole saga. Despite that scorched earth interview, MacFarlane and PTC President Tim Winter eventually met in person and developed what appears to have been a genuinely cordial relationship. The same organization whose leadership MacFarlane had compared to Hitler later praised The Orville, his science fiction series on Fox. Two people who had spent years as public adversaries apparently got along fine when they were actually in the same room. Television is a peculiar industry. There is a broader context to the PTC's campaign that is worth understanding, because it was not happening in a vacuum. The 2000s were a period of intense national debate in America about what was acceptable on broadcast television. The Janet Jackson Super Bowl moment in 2004 had caused a significant public reaction and led to real changes in how networks police their content. The FCC had substantially increased the fines it could impose on broadcasters for indecency. Conservative groups across the country felt that television had gone too far and that someone needed to hold it accountable. The PTC was the most organized, most aggressive expression of that conviction, and Family Guy was the most obvious possible target. It was animated, so it attracted children. It was on a major broadcast network in prime time, so it reached an enormous audience. Its content, the sexual jokes, the racial humor, the dark gags about death and disability and religion, was precisely the kind of material the PTC existed to oppose. What makes the story historically interesting is that the PTC's campaign, despite its scale and its persistence, did not ultimately accomplish what it set out to do. Family Guy was not cancelled as a result of their efforts. The FCC did not take action against Fox over any of the complaints the organization generated. Sponsors who left were replaced by others. The show not only survived, but grew larger, partly because the controversy kept its name in the news and kept new viewers curious about what all the fuss was actually about. There is a very old truth about censorship and entertainment that Family Guy's story illustrates plainly. When powerful people and organizations very publicly demand that something be banned, they almost always end up making more people interested in the thing they are trying to suppress. Every PTC press release about a Family Guy episode functioned, however unintentionally, as an advertisement, telling millions of people who might not have been paying attention that there was a show on Fox apparently so outrageous that a major national organization was filing government complaints about it. Some of those people tuned in specifically because of that. The PTC officially filed for bankruptcy in 2025, ending after 3 decades of operation. The organization that had spent years trying to remove Family Guy from American airwaves was outlasted by the show it had targeted. Family Guy was still in production and still airing new episodes at that point. MacFarlane made no public statement about the development, at least none that was reported, but the symmetry is hard to ignore. The culture war between the PTC and Family Guy was a dispute about what comedy was permitted to say on broadcast television, about whether animated content carried different responsibilities than live-action programming, and about how much power a pressure group should hold over what appears on a network any household with an antenna can access for free. Those questions were never definitively resolved by the fight. They simply became less urgent as television itself changed and the broadcast networks gradually lost their central place in how most people watched anything. What the war produced was a show that had been tested against sustained organized opposition for years and had not altered its approach in any meaningful way. Family Guy did not soften its content because of the PTC. It did not move its most controversial material to later time slots to appease them. It made an episode directly mocking them and was nominated for an Emmy for it. Whatever you think the PTC was right or wrong about, the outcome of the fight was clear. The show won. And if you think the PTC was the most dramatic thing Family Guy ever had to survive, if you think government complaints and advertiser pressure was the show's worst moment, then you have not heard about the episode that the United States government effectively banned from American television entirely, not because of anything it did wrong, but because of a single topic it dared to put inside an animated comedy. An episode that aired in the United Kingdom to an audience of over 1 million people and received perfectly ordinary reviews, while sitting completely unwatched in America because no network would go near it. That story is next. Section 3. Partial Terms of Endearment. The only episode still banned in America. There is one episode of Family Guy that has never aired on American television, not pulled after broadcasting, not edited and re-released, never aired, not once. The episode exists. It was made with the full cast, the full crew, and the full budget. It was finished and delivered. It sat on a shelf while the rest of Season 8 played on Fox in 2010, and it has remained on that shelf ever since. You can buy it on DVD. You can watch it if you live in another country. But if you are in the United States and you want to find it on any streaming service, it is simply not there. The episode is called Partial Terms of Endearment, and it is the most interesting banned piece of television in American history, not because of what it shows, but because of what it had the audacity to address. Here is what happens. Lois reconnects with an old college friend named Naomi. Naomi and her husband Dale have been unable to have a child of their own, and they ask Lois if she would be willing to carry a baby for them as a surrogate. Lois agrees. She goes through the process and becomes pregnant with their biological child. Then, before the pregnancy has progressed far, Naomi and Dale are killed in a car accident. Lois is left carrying a baby that now has no parents, and she and Peter must decide what to do. Peter initially pushes for an abortion, then encounters a group of pro-life activists and changes his mind, then changes his mind again. Lois goes back and forth as well. The episode presents both sides of the argument through Family Guy's usual irreverent style, meaning it makes jokes. It is not a straightforward drama, but it does not ultimately come down firmly on either side. It raises the question, shows multiple perspectives, and ends without spelling out in specific terms what Lois actually decides to do. That last detail is important. The show did not make a definitive statement about abortion. It did not tell the audience what to believe. By Family Guy's own standards, it handled the subject with more care than almost anything else the show had ever attempted. None of that influenced Fox's decision. The choice to ban the episode was made before Season 8 had even begun airing. The Family Guy team actually announced at San Diego Comic-Con in 2009 that Partial Terms of Endearment would not be appearing on Fox in the United States. They told their fans directly, in a room full of people who loved the show, that this episode was finished and would not be seen. Kevin Reilly, who was then president of Fox, explained the reasoning in an interview with the New York Times. He was straightforward about it. He described abortion as an extremely fragile subject at an extremely fragile economic moment. He said the episode felt like it was capable of causing serious trouble and that it simply was not worth it. Read that again carefully, because it tells you something precise about how major television networks actually function. Kevin Reilly was not saying the episode was poorly made. He was not saying it was more offensive than Family Guy's normal output. He was not pointing to any law or broadcast standard it had violated. He was saying that abortion as a topic was so politically charged in America at that specific moment that even an animated comedy treating it carefully and from multiple perspectives was not something Fox was willing to broadcast. The risk of advertiser backlash, political pressure, and public outrage from one side or the other was simply not worth it. This is a categorically different kind of controversy from everything that preceded it in this account. The PTC had targeted Family Guy for content that was deliberately shocking and deliberately transgressive. Partial Terms of Endearment was not trying to provoke anyone. It was trying to tell a story about a genuinely difficult situation and look at it honestly. And that honesty, that willingness to engage seriously with a hard topic, was apparently more frightening to the network than any quantity of crude jokes or dark cutaway gags. Fox did not merely decline to air the episode themselves. They also reportedly asked Adult Swim not to air it either, effectively blocking it from the entire American broadcast landscape. What happened outside America tells a strikingly different story. The BBC aired Partial Terms of Endearment in the United Kingdom on June 20th, 2010, placing it in the show's normal primetime slot at 10:30 in the evening. More than 1 million homes in the UK watched it. Reviews from critics were positive. Audiences did not revolt. The episode aired, people watched it, and life continued without significant incident. That contrast, banned in America and perfectly acceptable in Britain, is worth sitting with. The same episode that Fox considered too volatile for American television was broadcast without meaningful controversy by a major public broadcaster in another country. The content had not changed. The jokes had not changed. The handling of the subject had not changed. What changed was the cultural and political context surrounding it. Multiple television programs have addressed abortion since 2010. Live action dramas, comedies, animated series, the topic has appeared across American television in the years following Partial Terms of Endearment's ban. Some of those episodes were far more pointed in their perspective than anything Family Guy did in this one. They aired without the same level of network panic. Which raises an obvious question. Was Partial Terms of Endearment actually more dangerous than those other episodes? Or was it simply the first, arriving at a moment when networks were still paralyzed by the topic in a way they eventually moved past? The people involved in making the episode have always been clear that they considered the ban unnecessary. Fox released the episode on the Season 8 DVD set without hesitation. If the content was truly beyond acceptable limits, packaging it for retail sale seems like an odd response. The ban was not really about the content itself. It was about the specific visibility of a network broadcast, about not wanting to be the show that ignited a national argument during a period when Fox had no appetite for that fight. The episode represents something genuinely unique in the history of American animated television. It is not banned for being obscene. It is not banned for breaking any law or rule. It is banned because it touched the single subject that American broadcast networks decided, at that particular moment, was simply off the table, regardless of how that subject was handled. Every other episode that brought Family Guy into serious trouble did so because the show was consciously pushing into territory it knew would create friction. Partial Terms of Endearment is the one case where Family Guy tried to do something thoughtful and was still shut down for it. There is a strange kind of respect buried in that, if you look at it from a certain angle. The network was not afraid the episode would be bad. They were afraid it might work. They were afraid it would be good enough and honest enough about a genuinely difficult topic that it would pull millions of viewers into a conversation Fox did not want to be responsible for starting. As of this writing, Partial Terms of Endearment has still never aired on American television. It remains absent from Hulu, where every other Family Guy episode is available. It is the one gap in the catalog, a finished, fully produced piece of television that exists in a strange condition of being both completely real and completely invisible to the American audience it was made for. It is the clearest example in Family Guy's entire history of the show being stopped not by bad taste or by going too far, but by a topic considered too real, too current, and too politically charged to survive contact with American broadcast television. The next controversy is almost the exact opposite. Where Partial Terms of Endearment is a story about a show being punished for doing something careful, the next section is about an episode that did something genuinely careless and then got caught in a real-world tragedy that turned a bad joke into a national news story, a conspiracy theory, and one of the most uncomfortable moments in the show's entire history. Section 4. Turban Cowboy, the Boston Marathon, and the Alex Jones Conspiracy. On April 15, 2013, 2 bombs detonated near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. 3 people were killed. Hundreds more were injured. It was one of the most shocking acts of violence on American soil in years, and the entire country was watching the news in horror, trying to understand what had happened and who was responsible. Within hours, a video began circulating online, claiming that Family Guy had somehow predicted the attack. The video spread quickly. It was shared across social media platforms, picked up by conspiracy theory websites, and eventually promoted by radio host Alex Jones on his InfoWars platform. Millions of people saw it. The claim being made was that Family Guy, in an episode that had aired just 1 month earlier, had somehow depicted the Boston Marathon bombing before it happened. The video was a fabrication. A deliberate, carefully constructed lie produced by someone who extracted 2 completely unrelated scenes from the same episode, removed everything between them, and stitched them together to make it appear as a single connected sequence showing Peter Griffin winning the Boston Marathon by detonating a bomb with his phone. Here is what the episode actually contained. The episode in question is called Turban Cowboy. It is the 15th episode of Season 11, and it aired on March 17, 2013, exactly 1 month before the bombing. The plot involves Peter getting injured during a skydiving accident and meeting a Muslim man named Mahmoud in the hospital. Peter and Mahmoud become friends, and Peter is welcomed into his social circle. As the episode progresses, it is revealed that Mahmoud is part of a terrorist cell planning an attack. Peter gets entangled in the situation before Joe Swanson arrives to stop it, and the terrorists are arrested. The episode contains 2 separate scenes that the fake video combined into one. The first is a cutaway gag, one of Family Guy's signature brief comedic detours, in which sports broadcaster Bob Costas appears and asks Peter how he won the Boston Marathon. The cutaway then shows Peter driving his car through the marathon course, striking runners along the way. This is presented as a flashback joke, entirely disconnected from the episode's main plot. It is dark humor, the kind of thing Family Guy had been doing since the beginning. Taken on its own, it is a bad taste joke about a real event that many people would reasonably find offensive. But it involves a car, not a bomb. The second scene is from the actual plot of the episode, near the end, in which Peter accidentally dials a phone number that triggers the terrorist cell's explosives, causing a bridge to explode. This scene has nothing to do with the Boston Marathon. It is part of the storyline involving Mahmoud. The explosion occurs at a bridge, not at a race. The person who made the fake video took the Bob Costas scene showing Peter at the Boston Marathon, then cut directly to the explosion scene, stripping all context from both. The result appeared to show Peter winning the marathon by calling in a bomb. It looked deliberate. It looked as though the show had somehow depicted the attack before it happened. It was not real. The two scenes came from entirely different parts of the episode, with different storylines, different locations, and different characters. Anyone who watched the full episode could see immediately that the video was fabricated, but most of the people who shared it had not watched the episode. The clip looked convincing enough on its own. McFarlane found out about the video and responded immediately and directly. He described the edited clip as abhorrent. He said the attack was a crime and a tragedy, and that his thoughts were with the victims. He was clear that what was circulating was not what the show had made, that someone had deliberately manipulated footage to create a false connection between a cartoon and a real act of mass murder. Fox moved quickly as well. The network pulled Turban Cowboy from its website and from Hulu on April 16th, the day after the bombing. They stated publicly that they had no plans to rebroadcast the episode in the near future. YouTube was asked to remove copies of the falsified video, and Fox worked with the platform to take down as many of those clips as possible. The episode disappeared, not because Fox had concluded it was inherently too offensive in general, but because the combination of the real tragedy and the viral misinformation made it impossible to air without the context of the bombing overwhelming everything else about it. This was a fundamentally different kind of problem from anything Family Guy had encountered before. With partial terms of endearment, Fox made a deliberate preemptive decision before the episode ever aired that the subject matter was too politically sensitive. That was a controlled, considered choice. With Turban Cowboy, there was no warning. The episode had aired, people had watched it, critics had reviewed it, and life had moved on. Then, a real atrocity occurred. A fake video was produced, and a month-old episode of an animated comedy was suddenly at the center of a national conversation it had nothing to do with. The episode itself, separate from all the controversy, had not been well received. The main plot, involving Peter befriending a Muslim man who turned out to be a terrorist, was widely criticized for relying on a reductive and harmful idea that Muslim characters in American entertainment are inevitably revealed to be dangerous. A critic from the AV Club gave the episode a D and wrote that it felt like something produced in 2002 and left in a drawer for a decade, wholly unaware of how uniformly it was depicting Middle Eastern characters as threats. That criticism existed before the bombing and before the fake video. The episode had genuine problems independent of the tragedy that followed, but the question of whether the episode's actual content was offensive was completely swallowed by the conspiracy theory. Once the fake video started spreading, the conversation stopped being about whether the episode's portrayal of a Muslim character was harmful and became entirely about whether Family Guy had somehow anticipated a real terrorist attack. That is a far more alarming claim, and it drowned out everything else. Alex Jones promoting the fake video on InfoWars was a major factor in how quickly and how far it traveled. Jones had built an audience primed to believe that mainstream media and entertainment were connected to real events in ways the official account concealed. The idea that a Fox animated comedy had depicted the Boston Marathon bombing before it happened fit neatly into the interpretive framework his listeners had already adopted. The fact that the video was demonstrably false did not stop it from circulating widely in those communities. This moment sits in a specific place in Family Guy's history because it represents the point at which the show's controversy stopped being purely about taste and content and became entangled with real-world tragedy and deliberate misinformation. Every other controversial episode in the show's history can be debated on its own merits. Was the joke worth the offense? Was it too far? Was the target appropriate? Those are genuine questions with room for disagreement. With Turban Cowboy in the aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombing, the debate was being driven by something that was simply not true, and there was very little Family Guy could do about that. The episode eventually returned. Turban Cowboy came back to cable reruns and was added back to Hulu in September of 2022, almost a decade after the bombing. The passage of time created enough distance from the tragedy that the episode could exist again without automatically being read through the lens of the fake video and the real attack. Most people watching it today are probably entirely unaware of the situation surrounding it. But for a period of time, Turban Cowboy was the most discussed episode in Family Guy's history, not because of anything the show had actually done, but because of what someone else had falsely claimed it did. MacFarlane's response throughout was consistent. He condemned the fake video clearly and immediately. He expressed genuine sympathy for the victims of the actual attack. He did not try to defend the episode's content or argue that the pre-existing Boston Marathon jokes were acceptable in light of what had happened. He understood that the timing was terrible and that stepping back was the right response. Whether the episode deserved that response based on its own merits is a separate question. The Boston Marathon cutaway was dark and in poor taste, regardless of subsequent events. The main plot, built around a Muslim terrorist, was criticized before anyone knew a bombing was coming. The episode was not good and it was not kind. But it was also not what the fake video claimed it was. Both of those things are true, and both deserve to be said. The controversy around Turban Cowboy is ultimately a story about how quickly misinformation can seize control of a legitimate conversation, and how easily a piece of entertainment can get swept into something far larger than itself without any warning. None of those controversies, though, involve the show being accused of being genuinely harmful to a specific group of people by that group's own major organizations. The next section does, and the episode at the center of it is one that MacFarlane has said, as recently as 2022, he would not change. Section 5. The episode about Quagmire's dad and the transgender controversy. Some controversies fade quickly. The noise gets loud for a week or two, and then something else happens, and everyone moves on. The episode gets forgotten, and the show continues. The controversy around Quagmire's dad did not fade. It kept returning. It was still being written about and argued over more than a decade after the episode first aired. It became the example that critics and journalists reached for whenever the conversation turned to how animated comedy handles transgender representation. And in 2022, when a reporter asked Seth MacFarlane directly whether he would go back and change anything about the episode, his answer surprised a lot of people. He said no. The specific details of the episode matter, so it is worth going through them carefully. Quagmire's Dad is the 18th episode of Season 8 and aired on May 9th, 2010. The episode opens with Quagmire's father, Dan Quagmire, coming to visit Quahog. Dan is introduced as a decorated Vietnam War veteran, someone who served with distinction and has genuinely earned respect. When Peter and Joe first meet Dan, they assume he is gay based on some of his mannerisms. That assumption turns out to be wrong. Dan is a transgender woman who has spent her life presenting as a man and has now decided, at this stage of her life, to have gender confirmation surgery and begin living as her true self. She takes the name Ida. The episode follows Quagmire as he struggles to accept this. There are scenes between Quagmire and Ida that are written with genuine care. His confusion and pain are treated seriously, and the episode gives Ida a level of dignity as a character. She is still the war hero. She is still someone deserving of respect. The show makes this point deliberately. At the same time, the episode carries a second storyline involving Brian. While the situation with Quagmire's family unfolds, Brian travels away for a seminar and upon returning meets a woman he finds attractive. They spend time together and sleep together. Brian later discovers that the woman he has been seeing is Ida, Quagmire's father, post-surgery. Brian does not handle this well. He goes to the bathroom and vomits for 30 unbroken seconds on screen. The vomiting continues long enough that it stops being incidental and becomes the joke itself. The camera stays on it. The sound design ensures the audience hears every moment of it. That scene was what broke the episode for a very large number of people. GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and one of the most prominent organizations advocating for LGBT people in American media, released a statement shortly after the episode aired. GLAAD said the episode had ignited significant controversy among the LGBT community, with the most common response being that it was deeply offensive to transgender people. They said they shared the serious concerns being expressed by community members and that their team was addressing the situation directly with Fox. A writer for an LGBT media website named Brent Hardinger wrote a detailed review at the time that captured the divided reaction many people had. He acknowledged that the episode deserved some credit for the way it handled certain elements, for making Ida a war hero, for taking Quagmire's emotional journey seriously, for not constructing the entire thing as simple mockery. But he said the vomiting scene and several remarks made by other characters were shockingly insensitive. He found it impossible to reconcile the better parts of the episode with the worst, and said the gap between them was too large to overlook. MacFarlane's response to the criticism was interesting, and in some ways more revealing than the episode itself. He expressed genuine surprise at the intensity of the negative reaction. In a September 2010 interview, he said he did not encounter many people who held the views being attributed to the episode. He defended the Brian vomiting scene by drawing a comparison. He said that a straight man finding out he had slept with a transgender woman might react the way Brian did, in the same way a gay man might feel repulsed by a comparable situation involving a woman. He was trying to frame the scene as a reflection of Brian's specific orientation and character rather than as a statement about transgender people in general. Critics found that explanation insufficient. The problem, as many people articulated it, was not that Brian had a strong reaction. It was the specific nature of the joke, the extended graphic depiction of disgust lasting 30 seconds, anchored specifically in the fact that he had been with a transgender woman. The length of the scene was not neutral. It was making a statement, and that statement, regardless of the intent behind it, was harmful. In 2022, MacFarlane spoke to The Hollywood Reporter and was asked directly if there was anything he would change. His answer was that there were always details in earlier work he might approach differently, that it was more about small moments than any large structural overhaul. He would not make a major change to the episode overall. He explained again that the intent had been to show that Ida was still a war hero, still someone Quagmire could look up to and eventually respect, and that this message had gotten lost in the reaction to the more controversial elements. He also raised a detail that tends to go unmentioned in most discussions of the episode. Quagmire's dad was written by a Family Guy writer named Steve Callahan, whose own father had transitioned to a woman. Callahan was writing, at least in part, from lived experience, working through feelings about a parent's transition using the tools of a show built on dark comedy and shock humor. MacFarlane said this context was something people consistently missed when talking about the episode. That detail does not resolve the controversy, but it does complicate it. The person who wrote the episode was not approaching the subject from a place of abstract hostility toward transgender people. He was drawing on something he had actually experienced. Whether the tools of that particular show were appropriate for that particular subject is a separate question. But the episode did not originate from the spirit that its harshest critics assumed. The show's executive producer, Alex Sulkin, addressed the broader question of how Family Guy had evolved in its treatment of LGBT content in an interview with TV Line. He confirmed that placing episodes from 2005 or 2006 alongside episodes from 2018 or 2019 reveals real differences, and that the show had been actively working to move away from jokes centered on LGBT characters and situations. What had been acceptable in the show's earlier years was not something the writers wanted to continue in the same way. By season 22, that shift had extended to the treatment of other recurring elements as well, with conscious decisions being made to change how certain running gags operated. What makes Quagmire's Dad sit differently from other Family Guy controversies is that it involves a community, transgender people, who faced and continue to face genuine discrimination and real harm beyond the realm of television. A joke about a fictional historical figure, a parody of a celebrity, a dark cutaway about an abstract situation, those exist at some distance from real people's daily lives. Content about transgender people in 2010 existed in a landscape where those people had little positive representation in mainstream media and were regularly subjected to exactly the kind of disgust the Brian vomiting scene performed. The argument that the scene was harmful was not abstract. It connected to something concrete and ongoing. MacFarlane has never fully accepted that framing. He has consistently maintained that Family Guy operates as an equal opportunity offender, that the show makes uncomfortable jokes about everyone, that no group is treated as categorically off limits, and that this approach reflects an honesty that more carefully calibrated programming avoids. Whether you accept that argument depends largely on whether you believe equal opportunity offense is a meaningful concept, when the groups being offended occupy very different positions of power and safety in the real world. That is a genuine debate, not a simple one. What is beyond debate is that Quagmire's Dad became a defining episode in conversations about how American animated comedy handles transgender representation, and it is still cited in those conversations today, more than 15 years after it aired, sometimes by people who acknowledge that the episode was attempting, however imperfectly, to do something more complicated than pure mockery. That fight with other animated shows, though, was not limited to advocacy groups. There was one battle that happened entirely within the animation industry itself, a public, bitter, and surprisingly personal war between Family Guy and another show that decided to use its own airtime to explain to the world exactly why it believed Family Guy should not exist. Section 6. The South Park War. When the entire animation industry took sides. In April of 2006, South Park aired a two-part episode called Cartoon Wars. On the surface, the episode concerned the citizens of South Park panicking over an upcoming Family Guy episode that planned to depict the Prophet Muhammad as a character, a genuinely sensitive creative choice that had prompted protests and riots in several countries after a Danish newspaper published caricatures of Muhammad the previous year. South Park used that real controversy as its backdrop for a story involving Kyle, Cartman, and a trip to Hollywood. But the Muhammad storyline was not what Cartoon Wars was really about. What it was actually about was South Park creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone using their own show to tell the entire world, as directly as possible, that they believed Family Guy was bad television. not edgy bad or controversial bad, but bad in the specific sense of being lazily written, creatively dishonest, and unworthy of the reputation it had built. They did not say this quietly. In the episode, Cartman travels to the Family Guy studio in Hollywood with the stated goal of getting an upcoming episode pulled from the air. When he gets inside the studio, he discovers something that became one of the most talked about jokes in South Park history. Family Guy, the episode reveals, is not written by human beings at all. The show is produced by a tank full of manatees, large, slow sea mammals, who push around balls with words written on them. The manatees select balls at random, combine them into groups, and whatever combination of words results becomes the cutaway gag for that week's episode. The joke is that Family Guy's signature cutaway humor is not the product of creative thought or intentional writing. It is random, generated by animals making accidental choices. There is no intelligence behind it. Parker and Stone were not being subtle. They were saying directly, through a cartoon watched by millions of people, that Family Guy's writing was the equivalent of something produced by chance rather than by actual human creativity, and that the cutaway gags, which were Family Guy's most distinctive feature and the thing the show was most loved for, were meaningless noise dressed up as comedy. The episode aired, and the reaction was immediate. What Parker and Stone probably did not fully anticipate, or perhaps anticipated and welcomed, was how much support they received from within the animation industry itself. After Cartoon Wars Part 1 aired, they were contacted by writers from 2 other major animated shows. The Simpsons staff reached out and expressed their appreciation. The King of the Hill staff did the same. Parker later said publicly that the Simpsons writers had told him they hated Family Guy even more than he and Stone did. The King of the Hill staff reportedly told them they were doing God's work. Read that again. The writing teams of The Simpsons and King of the Hill, 2 of the most respected animated programs in television history, privately celebrated South Park for publicly attacking Family Guy. These were real communications that Parker and Stone disclosed in interviews, and the sentiment behind them reflected something that had been building in the animation community for years. The core of the criticism, beyond the manatee joke, was about what Family Guy's success represented. Parker and Stone had built South Park on a specific principle. Every joke should serve the story. Comedy should emerge from character and situation and ideas, and gags for their own sake represent a form of creative laziness that degrades the entire medium. Family Guy, in their view, was the opposite of everything they believed good comedy should be. It was a show where cutaway gags were completely disconnected from the plot, where humor did not emerge from character or story, but was simply inserted at intervals, and where the enormous popularity of this approach proved that audiences would reward lazy writing as long as it made them laugh for 30 seconds at a time. Parker said in commentary recorded for the Cartoon Wars DVD that he and Stone did hate Family Guy. He was clear that they understood why people loved it, that they recognized it spoke to something genuine in its audience, and that they did not think it should be canceled. But they did not respect it as writing. Being told constantly that South Park and Family Guy were the same kind of show felt to them like an insult to everything they were trying to do. Stone added that you could tell smart people were working on Family Guy. The complaint was not that the people behind the show lacked ability. It was that those smart people were producing something beneath their own capabilities, and that the format they had chosen was a waste of what they were capable of. McFarlane's public response to Cartoon Wars was more measured than might be expected. In a 2012 interview with Rolling Stone, he said he found the South Park episode making fun of Family Guy funny and accurate. He found it genuinely amusing. What confused and bothered him was not the episode itself, but the personal intensity that Parker and Stone expressed in press interviews outside of it. When they were speaking to journalists rather than making comedy, the things they said about him and his show had a venom to them that he found baffling. He said he did not know them personally, had never had a meaningful interaction with either of them, and could not understand where that level of feeling was coming from. On The Howard Stern Show, when asked about Parker and Stone, MacFarlane joked that they could go to hell, while also noting that whenever he actually encountered them in person, everything was perfectly cordial. The hostility existed in the press, not in the same room. Family Guy eventually responded on its own terms. In a 2009 episode called Spies Reminiscent of Us, Peter and Quagmire participate in an improv comedy show. Peter keeps performing his signature style, random gags, non sequiturs, jokes with no connection to anything. The crowd loves it. Quagmire keeps trying to steer the comedy toward deeper character-based humor, encouraging the audience to build on what came before rather than accepting random laughs. The crowd ignores Quagmire's approach. The meaning of the scene is clear. Family Guy was mocking South Park's criticism directly by showing that audiences preferred Peter's style over the more disciplined alternative. The writers of Family Guy also acknowledged the manatee joke in their own DVD commentaries, referring to their own cutaway gags as manatee jokes. They absorbed the insult and turned it into an internal joke among themselves. The broader context of all of this is important to understand. The feud between South Park and Family Guy was not simply two shows having a disagreement. It was a debate about what animated comedy is supposed to be and what it is supposed to do. South Park's position was that comedy has a responsibility to be about something, to carry ideas, to illuminate character, to engage genuinely with the world. Family Guy's position, at least as represented by its actual content, was that comedy's obligation is to be funny, and that if the audience is laughing, the work has succeeded regardless of what structural choices produced that laughter. Both positions have merit. Both have weaknesses. The fact that both shows have now been running for decades, each with enormous audiences, suggests there is more than one viable approach to animated comedy. What is particularly striking about the Cartoon Wars situation in retrospect is that The Simpsons, whose writing staff had privately thanked South Park for attacking Family Guy, later crossed over with Family Guy directly in a 2014 episode called The Simpsons Guy. The two shows that had supposedly been rivals collaborated for a full crossover. MacFarlane and Simpsons creator Matt Groening both said publicly and repeatedly that there was no real personal animosity between them. Groening told a reporter that he had more in common with MacFarlane than with most of the people he worked with. South Park and Family Guy never made peace in the same way. Both shows air on Comedy Central without any indication that Parker and Stone have revised their view of MacFarlane's approach to writing. Cartoon Wars was the most public creative dispute in the history of American animated television. It pulled in The Simpsons, King of the Hill, and various other creators. It forced a genuine conversation about what makes comedy legitimate and what makes it lazy. And it did absolutely nothing to slow Family Guy's success. But the next controversy is different from all of them in one specific way. It did not come from outside the show. It did not come from a watchdog group, a rival program, a government agency, or a real-world tragedy. It came from an admission that Seth MacFarlane himself made about a decision his own writing team made, a decision that affected a character who had been on the show since the very beginning, and when fans found out the real reason behind it, a lot of them were not okay with the answer. Section 7. The Anti-Semitism Accusation. Before Partial Terms of Endearment became the episode America Banned, there was a different one that held that title. For several years, the most discussed banned Family Guy episode was not about abortion or transgender characters or real-world tragedy. It was about Jewish people. Specifically, it was about Peter Griffin deciding that the solution to his financial problems was to get his son a Jewish friend, because Jewish people are good with money. That is the premise. That is what the episode is built on. And Fox looked at it, decided it was too much, and pulled it from the schedule before it ever aired. The episode is called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, and it is the 22nd and final episode of Season 3. It was produced in 2000 as part of the show's original run before the first cancellation. Fox reviewed the episode and made the determination that its content could be read as anti-Semitic, meaning harmful and offensive toward Jewish people, and chose not to air it. The episode sat unreleased for 3 years. In 2003, when Family Guy had been canceled and Adult Swim had picked up the reruns, the episode finally aired on Cartoon Network in November of that year. Fox eventually aired it themselves in December of 2004, years after it was originally produced. By that point, the show had already been announced for revival, and the episode no longer carried the same perceived risk. Here is what the episode actually contains. Peter is struggling financially and feels unable to manage money, always making decisions that leave the family in trouble. He meets a man named Max Weinstein, who is Jewish, and is immediately impressed by how competent and capable Max is with financial matters. Peter becomes convinced that Jewish people are inherently better with money than other people, and that if Chris became Jewish, he would acquire those same abilities. Peter decides to take Chris to Las Vegas to have him converted without telling Lois. The episode includes a song called I Need a Jew. Peter sings it. The lyrics lean directly into Jewish stereotypes, including references to Jewish people being good with money and being looked down upon by others. The song uses the melody from When You Wish Upon a Star, the famous song from the Disney film Pinocchio. The character of Max Weinstein is not portrayed as evil or sinister. He is portrayed as competent, kind, and reasonable. Peter is the one portrayed as wrong. His stereotyped beliefs about Jewish people are the target of the humor, not Jewish people themselves. Max at one point directly pushes back on Peter's misguided understanding of Judaism. The show frames Peter's behavior as foolish rather than correct. Fox's concern was that even with that framing, the episode was engaging with stereotypes in a way that could generate offense regardless of intent. When a show builds its entire premise on the idea that Jewish people have a special relationship with money, it is using that stereotype as the engine of the comedy, whether or not it ultimately tells the audience the stereotype is wrong. Some people felt the episode was smart satire of prejudice. Others felt it was prejudice dressed in a satirical costume. Fox, at the time, was not willing to find out which reaction would dominate. The legal situation that followed added another layer to the episode's history. In October of 2007, a company called Born Music Publishers filed a lawsuit against the makers of Family Guy. Born owned the rights to When You Wish Upon a Star and argued that Family Guy had used the song's melody without permission and without creating a genuine parody of the song itself. Their position was that the lyrics of I Need a Jew were not commenting on When You Wish Upon a Star as a piece of music. They were simply borrowing a recognizable tune for a completely different joke. And if the new song was not actually making fun of the original song, then it did not qualify as parody and was not protected. This was a substantive legal argument. American law allows people to use copyrighted material without permission when creating a parody of that specific material, on the basis that parody by its nature must reference the original in order to comment on it. But if you are not actually commenting on the original, if you are simply borrowing the melody for an unrelated purpose, that protection does not apply. Born claimed that associating their song with what they described as vile and anti-Semitic lyrics caused real harm to its value and reputation. They wanted distribution of the episode stopped and sought unspecified damages. The case was decided in March of 2009, when United States District Judge Deborah Batts ruled in favor of Family Guy. The judge found that the show had not infringed on Born's copyright by transforming the song for comedic use. Family Guy won the lawsuit. The ruling was significant not just for the show, but for animated comedy more broadly. It provided a clearer sense of how much room existed when it came to using recognizable musical material in a transformative comedic context. The episode also contains an appearance that tends to surprise people when they learn about it. During the episode, a version of Optimus Prime, the hero of the Transformers franchise, shows up in a non-sequitur moment that many fans have described as one of the best random appearances the show has ever done. It became one of the most remembered parts of the episode, which is interesting given that the episode was primarily known for controversy. The question of whether When You Wish Upon a Weinstein is actually anti-Semitic has never been resolved with the finality of a court verdict. The episode played with stereotypes in a direct way. It built its entire story on the idea that Jewish people have a particular set of abilities that Peter wanted access to. The intent was satirical. The joke was meant to be on Peter for believing these things, not on Jewish people for supposedly having these traits. But intent and effect are not always the same thing, and a joke that relies on a stereotype to function is doing something with that stereotype regardless of who the official comic target is supposed to be. What is clear is that Fox's decision to hold the episode back for 3 years reflected a genuine calculation about risk. When it finally aired, the reaction was more muted than the years of buildup had suggested it would be. Some people saw the anti-Semitism concern as an overreaction and felt the satirical intent was clear enough to protect it. Others felt the original concern had been valid. The episode is now freely available on streaming services and is watched regularly by Family Guy fans as part of the show's normal catalog. The controversy around it has faded to the point where most people watching it today are probably unaware it ever caused significant problems. But the pattern it represents, a show using a minority group's most recognized stereotype as the engine of a joke and then defending itself by arguing the joke is really about the person holding the prejudice rather than the group being stereotyped, is a pattern that has shown up repeatedly in Family Guy's history. It showed up with Quagmire's dad. It showed up with Turban Cowboy. The show consistently makes the argument that it is satirizing prejudice rather than expressing it, and critics consistently question whether that distinction is as clean in practice as it is in theory. That argument was also at the center of one of the most unusual legal battles Family Guy ever fought. Not a lawsuit about stereotypes or offensive content, but a lawsuit filed by one of the most beloved figures in American entertainment history. Someone who had built an entire career on wholesome comedy and felt that Family Guy had taken something that belonged to her and dragged it through the mud. She was not wrong about what the show had done. The question was whether the law gave her any power to stop it. Section 8. The Carol Burnett lawsuit and the question of who parody laws actually protect. Carol Burnett is not the kind of person you would expect to find at the center of a legal dispute with Family Guy. She spent 11 seasons hosting one of the most celebrated variety programs in the history of American television. The Carol Burnett Show ran from 1967 to 1978 and was beloved by tens of millions of viewers. It won dozens of Emmy Awards and made Burnett one of the most recognized and respected entertainers in the country. She was known for her warmth, her generosity toward her cast and crew, and her genuine love for the audiences who tuned in every week. She ended every episode of her show by tugging her ear, a small personal gesture she had started as a way to send a signal to her grandmother, who watched from home and knew exactly what it meant. That ear tug was not simply a habit. It was one of the most recognized personal signatures in American entertainment. It carried meaning that had nothing to do with show business. It was Burnett saying goodnight to someone she loved in a private language broadcast to millions, who understood they were watching something intimate and real. Family Guy made a joke out of it. The episode in question is called Peterotica from Season 4, which aired on April 23, 2006. Peter and his friends visit an adult bookstore. When Peter expresses surprise that the store appears clean, Quagmire explains that Carol Burnett works there part-time as a janitor. The scene cuts to a cartoon version of Burnett dressed as her famous character, the Charwoman, a cleaning woman character she had created and performed on her show for years, recognizable by her blue outfit and the mop and bucket she always carried. The cartoon Charwoman is shown mopping the floor of the adult bookstore while surrounded by explicit adult products, as a slightly altered version of the Carol Burnett show theme plays in the background. Then, a character says that when Burnett tugged her ear at the end of the show, she was really saying goodnight to her mom. Quagmire responds by asking what she tugged to say goodnight to her dad. That last line was what pushed Burnett from offended to legally active. The joke takes her grandmother, the actual person the ear tug was meant for, someone Burnett had spoken about publicly with genuine tenderness, changes her to Burnett's mother, and then makes a crude sexual suggestion about what gesture she might have used for her father. It transformed something Burnett considered one of the most meaningful and personal aspects of her entire career into a dirty joke. In March of 2007, Burnett filed a lawsuit against 20th Century Fox seeking more than $2 million in damages. She argued that Family Guy had used her name and likeness without permission, had used the Charwoman character without permission, had used an altered version of her theme song without permission, and had violated her right to control how her image and persona were used in commercial entertainment. Fox's defense was built entirely around one concept: parody. Under American law, a parody, a piece of comedy that mocks or comments on an existing work by imitating it, is permitted to use elements of the original without seeking the original creator's approval. The principle holds that parody by its nature must invoke its subject in order to comment on it, and that this necessity justifies using copyrighted or trademarked material in ways that would otherwise constitute infringement. Fox argued that placing the Charwoman in an adult bookstore constituted a parody of Burnett's wholesome public image. The comedy depended on the collision between who Carol Burnett was known to be and the context she was being placed in. Without the audience's recognition of the Charwoman, the theme song, and the carefully cultivated image Burnett had spent decades building, the joke does not exist. That collision, Fox argued, is exactly what parody looks like. The court agreed. On June 4, 2007, United States District Judge Dean Pregerson dismissed Burnett's lawsuit, ruling that the segment was protected under the First Amendment as parody. He cited established legal precedents affirming comedy's right to mock and comment on public figures and their work without requiring permission from those figures. Burnett received nothing. The episode continued to air without edits. The Charwoman remained in the adult bookstore. The ear tug joke remained in the episode. Judge Pregerson did acknowledge something important in his ruling. He said he had no doubt Burnett was a beloved and respected figure in American entertainment. He understood the segment was distasteful and personally offensive to her. He fully appreciated how upsetting it was for her to see the Charwoman, the theme song, and the ear tug used in this way. He said the dispute reflected a genuine gap between older media and newer media, between a time when certain things were considered off-limits on television and a current era in which animated comedy had removed nearly all of those limits. He was not pretending the segment was kind or that Burnett had no reason to feel wronged. He was saying that feeling wronged and having a legal case were two different things, and that the law in this situation protected Family Guy rather than Burnett. Fox's defense also contained an additional element that some legal observers found worth noting. They pointed out that Burnett herself had built her career on exactly this kind of comedy. The Carol Burnett Show regularly parodied movies, television programs, and public figures. Burnett had spent years taking beloved things and placing them in unexpected or absurd contexts for laughs. Fox was essentially arguing that someone who had made her name as a parodist did not have unusually strong standing to object when she became the subject of someone else's parody. That argument was not necessary to the legal ruling. but it added a layer to the public conversation about the lawsuit that made people think. There is something genuinely uncomfortable about a comedian who spent her career doing this kind of comedy being the one in court arguing that this particular instance of it had gone too far. Within months of the Burnett case being dismissed, Family Guy was sued again. This time, the plaintiff was the company that owned the rights to When You Wish Upon a Star, the song whose melody had been used in the I Need a Jew number from the Weinstein episode. That lawsuit was also ultimately decided in Family Guy's favor, and at the end of 2007, a third lawsuit arrived. An actor named Art Metrano filed a case regarding a scene in the direct-to-DVD film Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, in which Jesus Christ performs a comedy routine involving specific hand gestures while humming a distinctive tune. Metrano claimed the scene reproduced a signature act he had created and performed throughout his career. The case was initially dismissed, then refiled, and eventually settled out of court in 2010. The specific terms of the settlement were not made public. In roughly 4 years, Family Guy faced 3 separate copyright and likeness lawsuits from 3 different parties. It won 2 outright on First Amendment grounds. The third was privately settled. No episode was altered or removed as a result of any of these challenges. The show's content remained exactly as it was. The pattern across all 3 cases tells you something about what Family Guy was doing and how it understood its own creative approach. The show was not simply being reckless, it was operating according to a consistent philosophy that comedy's right to parody and comment on public figures and existing works is one of the most important protections available to creative people, and that conceding that principle, even when the target of the parody found it offensive, would ultimately damage comedy more than any single lawsuit could. MacFarlane has never denied that Family Guy regularly produces genuine offense. What he has resisted is the idea that being offended gives someone the right to suppress a piece of comedy. The Carol Burnett case tested that principle directly, and the court sided with the principle rather than with the person who had been hurt by it. The lawsuits were battles fought in courtrooms with lawyers and judges and legal briefs. They were formal and structured and ultimately resolved by a defined set of rules. The next controversy is different. It is messier, more personal, and it involves a confession from the show's own creator about why a character who had been on screen since the very beginning was treated the way she was. A confession that many people found more uncomfortable than any joke the show had ever made. Section 9. The Meg Griffin Problem. What Seth MacFarlane actually admitted. Meg Griffin has been on Family Guy since the very first episode. She is one of the original 5 members of the Griffin family. She has been in every season and has appeared in hundreds of episodes across more than 2 decades of television. By any measure of presence and longevity, she is a central character. She is also the character that every other character on the show treats as worthless. Her father Peter ignores her, insults her, and physically harms her on a regular basis. Her mother Lois dismisses her. Her brother Chris mocks her. Even Brian the dog, who is supposed to be the thoughtful and reasonable voice in the Griffin household, treats Meg as someone beneath his attention. The kids at her school reject her. The adults in Quahog want nothing to do with her. Strangers who have never met her treat her with contempt on sight. There is no corner of Meg's world where she is treated as someone who matters. This went on season after season. The jokes at Meg's expense became a recurring feature of the show. Not occasional, not situational, but constant. An episode could be about almost anything, and somewhere within it, there would almost certainly be a moment where someone said or did something cruel to Meg, and the scene would move on without consequence. It became so consistent and so reliable that it stopped feeling like a character trait and started feeling like something the show was doing deliberately without fully reckoning with what it meant. For a long time, the official position from the people making Family Guy was that the Meg abuse was simply dark comedy. The show had always pressed into uncomfortable territory. Treating a character badly was not different in principle from any of the other dark things the show did regularly. It was part of Family Guy's identity as a show that did not flinch from things that made people uncomfortable. Then, Seth MacFarlane actually explained where it came from. In an interview that circulated widely and received significant attention, MacFarlane admitted something a lot of fans had not expected to hear. He said the decision to make Meg the show's punching bag came from the writing room. And the writing room, he explained, was at that time composed almost entirely of men. Men who, when it came to writing a teenage girl, simply did not know what they were doing. He said directly that the male writers on Family Guy had difficulty relating to Meg as a character. They struggled to write believable stories about a teenage girl's experience. They could not make her funny in the way they made the other characters funny. And rather than solving that problem by bringing in writers who might have had a better understanding of what Meg's life could look like, or by doing the harder creative work of figuring out how to write her properly, they took the easier path. They made her a target. They made her the character that everything bad happens to. And MacFarlane acknowledged that this became, in his own words, a kind of therapeutic outlet for the writers. When this explanation became widely known, the reaction from a large portion of the audience was not understanding or forgiveness. It was anger. The response divided along a clear line. On one side, people who had always found the Meg jokes funny, or at least harmless, saw the explanation as an honest behind-the-scenes confession that did not really change anything. Comedy writers make practical decisions about their characters all the time. If the joke worked, it worked. On the other side, people who had always felt uncomfortable with how Meg was treated now had confirmation that their discomfort had been tracking something real. The show had not developed a teenage girl character through some intentional creative strategy designed to say something meaningful about how society treats young women. It had failed to develop her at all. And rather than acknowledging that failure, it had turned the failure itself into the joke. Meg was not being treated badly as a comment on anything. She was being treated badly because the people writing her could not figure out what else to do with her. One response that circulated widely after MacFarlane's explanation became public captured what many people were feeling. A commenter observed that of all the directions the writing team could have taken, they had consistently chosen to punch down. Another person asked why the response to not knowing how to write a teenage girl was to make her life miserable rather than to hire someone who actually could. That last point became the central criticism. It was not just that the Meg jokes were cruel. It was that the cruelty had come from a specific failure, and that failure had been covered over for years by presenting it as an intentional creative decision. The show itself had an episode that tried to offer an in-story explanation for why Meg was treated the way she was. In a Season 10 episode called Seahorse Seashell Party, Meg finally breaks and confronts her family about how they treat her. She calls each of them out directly. The scene is written as a genuine emotional moment, not a joke. Meg makes real points about real harm. The family is briefly rattled. Then the episode resolves by suggesting that Meg serves a specific function in the family. She absorbs their dysfunction. She takes the cruelty and the frustration and the bad feeling that would otherwise tear the Griffins apart, and she carries it so they do not have to. The episode frames this as almost noble, Meg as the person who holds the family together by being their outlet. At the end, Meg accepts this role and things return to normal. Many viewers found this resolution deeply unsatisfying. It did not address the problem. It reframed the abuse as necessary and gave it a justification that many felt made things worse rather than better. Telling a character that the reason everyone treats her terribly is because her suffering keeps the family functional is not the same as treating her with respect. It is giving the cruelty a purpose without questioning whether the cruelty should exist at all. The Meg situation connects to something broader about what happened to Family Guy after its 2005 revival. When the show returned for season 4, several characters came back with their defining traits amplified beyond their original proportions. Peter became more extreme, Quagmire's behavior became more extreme, and Meg's role as the family's target became more extreme. What had been occasional in the early seasons became relentless. What had been a character quirk became the character's entire identity. MacFarlane acknowledged this escalation. He has pointed to Quagmire as another example of a character whose traits were pushed beyond what was originally intended. In the early seasons, Quagmire was a womanizer whose behavior was ethically questionable but framed as comedy. As the seasons progressed, what Quagmire did to women in the show became significantly more serious in nature, to the point where critics noted that a live-action version of many of his later storylines would not read as comedy at all. The difference between Quagmire and Meg, though, is that Quagmire is the one doing harmful things. Meg is the one having harmful things done to her. With Quagmire, the show asks you to laugh at someone behaving badly. With Meg, it asks you to laugh at someone being hurt. A significant number of viewers found the second request harder to accept than the first. The change that eventually came to the Meg storyline was real and documented. By season 22, the running gag of abusing Meg had stopped. People who follow the show closely have noted that the shift coincided with two things happening at roughly the same time. The public backlash against the Meg jokes had grown large enough to be impossible to ignore, and the composition of the writing staff had changed. More women had joined the team. That second detail sits most pointedly next to MacFarlane's original explanation. He said the problem came from a writing room full of men who did not know how to write a teenage girl. The thing that eventually fixed the problem was adding people to the room who did. It took more than 15 years to get there. Meg spent those 15 years as the target of every bad joke the show needed somewhere to put. What makes this controversy different from every other one in this account is that it does not involve a single episode, a single joke, a banned broadcast, or a legal case. It accumulated slowly across hundreds of episodes over more than a decade. It was embedded in the structure of the show itself. And when the explanation finally came, it was not that the show had been trying to say something meaningful or provocative. It was that the people making it had not known what to do with a teenage girl and had responded by making her life miserable instead. Family Guy has survived every controversy in this account, canceled twice and came back, fought the PTC and kept going, banned an episode and kept going, got tangled in a real-world tragedy and kept going, lost lawsuits and won them, was publicly attacked by competitors and kept going. The Meg situation is the one controversy where the show's own creator looked back and acknowledged, without much argument, that something had genuinely gone wrong. And yet, the show kept going after that admission too. That pattern of survival, that ability to absorb criticism and controversy and keep producing episodes regardless, brings us to the final section. The one that started before any of these controversies. The one that involves Seth MacFarlane personally, and not just the show he created. Because everything else in this account is a story about what Family Guy did. The next section is a story about what almost happened to Seth MacFarlane himself on a Tuesday morning in September of 2001, and how close the world came to a version of events where none of this controversy ever existed at all. Section 10. Seth MacFarlane, American Airlines Flight 11, and the September 11th episodes. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, Seth MacFarlane was supposed to be on a plane. Not a plane in the general sense, a specific plane. American Airlines Flight 11, departing from Boston Logan International Airport and headed to Los Angeles. That aircraft was hijacked by terrorists at 7:59 in the morning. At 8:46, it was flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. Everyone on board was killed. McFarlane was not on it. The reason he was not on it is one of the strangest biographical facts attached to any major figure in American entertainment. The night before, McFarlane had been in Rhode Island giving a lecture at his old college. After the lecture, he went out and had drinks with friends. He stayed out later than he should have. He woke up the next morning hungover and running behind schedule. His travel agent had also made an error with his itinerary, giving him the wrong departure time. The agent had told him the flight left at 8:15 when it actually departed at 7:45. Between the hangover slowing him down and the incorrect time from his travel agent, McFarlane arrived at the gate at Boston Logan approximately 10 minutes after the doors had closed. The gate agent told him he was too late. The flight had already departed. McFarlane went to the airport lounge and fell asleep. He woke up roughly 40 minutes later to find out that the plane he had missed had been flown into the World Trade Center. He has told this story in interviews multiple times over the years, always with the same combination of matter-of-fact delivery and quiet awareness of what it means. He has described arriving at the counter and being told the gate was closed. He has recalled waking up in the lounge and discovering what had happened. He has consistently described the immediate aftermath as rattling, his own word, while also being clear that he did not spend years afterward feeling as though he had been spared for some special reason, or that the near miss had fundamentally changed how he approached his life. He said he was late for everything, and that on this particular morning, being late had saved him. He treated it, at least publicly, as coincidence rather than destiny, and did not lean into the drama of it or make it the centerpiece of a personal narrative about survival and purpose. What makes the story relevant to an account of Family Guy's controversies is not just the biographical fact of it. It is what the show did with September 11th in the years that followed, and why those choices carried a particular weight coming from this creator. Family Guy addressed September 11th multiple times across its run. The most significant and most contested of these was an episode in which Brian and Stewie travel back in time and find themselves positioned to prevent the attacks from happening. They succeed. The hijackings do not occur. September 11th does not happen in the version of history they have created. Then, the episode shows what the world looks like without it. The show's answer is specific and dark. Without the national unity and collective grief that followed the attacks, America continues down a path of deepening political division. The anger that had been accumulating through the 1990s is never interrupted by a shared tragedy. The country fractures further. A civil war eventually breaks out. States begin to leave. A nuclear conflict follows. Brian and Stewie conclude that the world is worse without September 11th than it was with it. They travel back again and ensure the attacks happen. The episode ends with Stewie saying they had done it, that they had made September 11th happen, and suggesting a high five. He then immediately acknowledges that this probably would not look good out of context. That self-aware final beat did not protect the episode from the reaction it received. Entertainment Weekly published a critical piece about it. Other outlets questioned whether Family Guy had finally gone somewhere it had no business going. The argument from critics was not primarily about the mechanics of the time travel plot. It was about whether an animated comedy had any right to make September 11th the subject of a joke at all, regardless of what the joke was actually saying. McFarlane pushed back. In an interview on a program called Rove LA, he was asked to defend the episode directly. His response was that the criticism was misguided and that he was happy to engage with the argument. He explained what the episode was actually doing, that Brian and Stewie traveled back in time for reasons unrelated to the attacks, that while there, Brian told his past self about them, and that the moral of the story was specifically about the dangers of going back and altering the past. The episode was not, in McFarlane's telling, a joke about September 11th. It was a story about time travel that used September 11th as the historical event whose absence produced consequences. He also pointed out something his critics rarely addressed directly. He had been booked on one of the planes. He had come within 10 minutes of being on Flight 11. Whatever anyone thought about whether Family Guy should be making material that touched on the attacks, MacFarlane had at minimum a personal relationship with September 11th that gave him a different standing to engage with it than a creator who had simply watched the events unfold on television. The show had actually referenced its creator's near miss before the more controversial time travel episode. In an earlier episode, Brian and Stewie are in conversation, and Brian mentions that he was supposed to be on one of the planes that day. Without missing a beat, Stewie says that he was too. The joke is quiet and passes quickly. It works because MacFarlane voices both Brian and Stewie, so the line is effectively MacFarlane acknowledging his own near-death experience through two of his characters simultaneously. It is one of the more unusual moments in the show's history, a genuine biographical fact embedded inside a passing joke that most viewers probably registered as nothing more than a throwaway line. The September 11th material in Family Guy sits differently from every other controversy in this account because of that biographical dimension. When the show made a bad taste joke about the Boston Marathon, it was a show making a poor decision about a public event it had no personal connection to. When the show made choices about how to engage with September 11th, it was a show whose creator had nearly died in the attacks, making decisions about something real and personal and enormous. Whether that personal connection made those choices more acceptable or less acceptable does not have a simple answer. Someone who nearly died in an event has a reasonable claim to engage with it in whatever way helps them process it. But September 11th did not only affect the people who were on those planes. It affected thousands of families, an entire city, and a country permanently changed by what happened. MacFarlane's near miss gives him a connection to that day that most people do not have, but it does not give him ownership of it. MacFarlane himself appears to understand this distinction. He has never argued that his near miss grants him special permission to do whatever he wants with September 11th in his comedy. He has argued that comedy has the right to engage with anything, that dark humor is a legitimate response to dark events, and that what matters is the quality and honesty of the specific work in question. The conspiracy theory dimension of this story also circles back to September 11th in an indirect way. When the fake turban cowboy video spread in 2013, the person most responsible for pushing it to a wide audience was Alex Jones, who had built his entire platform on conspiracy theories, claiming that the September 11th attacks were an inside job planned by the American government. The idea that Family Guy had somehow predicted or been connected to the Boston Marathon bombing was an extension of the same conspiratorial thinking Jones had applied to the original attacks. MacFarlane, who had nearly died on September 11th and had spent years making comedy that engaged with the legacy of that day, now found himself at the center of a conspiracy theory being promoted by someone who did not believe the official account of the attacks in the first place. The strangeness of that situation is hard to overstate. A man who missed a flight by 10 minutes and spent the following decade making jokes about the near miss as a way of processing it found himself accused, through a deliberately fabricated video, of having somehow foreshadowed a different terrorist attack years later. The conspiracy was false and was quickly exposed as such, but its existence said something about how certain corners of the internet had come to see Family Guy, not as a comedy show making bad taste jokes, but as something with hidden connections to real-world events. None of that is true. Family Guy is a comedy show. MacFarlane is a comedy writer and voice actor who got extraordinarily lucky on the morning of September 11th, 2001, and who has spent the years since doing what comedy writers do, turning the material of the world around him, including its darkest corners, into jokes. Whether those jokes were always appropriate, whether they always found their target, whether they carried the weight of their subject matter with the care it deserved, those are the questions this account has been asking across all 10 sections. The answer, across all of them, is complicated. Sometimes the show got it right, sometimes it got it badly wrong, sometimes it got it wrong and kept going anyway. That last part, keeping going, is perhaps the single most defining fact of Family Guy's entire existence. Every controversy covered here ends the same way. The double cancellation, the war with the Parents Television Council, the banned episode, the Boston Marathon situation, the transgender controversy, the South Park feud, the anti-Semitism accusation, the Carol Burnett lawsuit, the Meg problem, the September 11th material. The show absorbed every single one of these and kept making episodes. And the man at the center of it, the one who created it and voices its most important characters, and has been there since the hand-animated pilot he built in his apartment, is someone who almost did not make it to the first day of production. Someone who overslept, whose travel agent wrote down the wrong time, who sat down in an airport lounge and woke up to find out that the plane he was supposed to be on had changed history. 10 minutes. That is the margin by which Family Guy and everything that came with it, the controversies, the lawsuits, the feuds, the banned episodes, the culture war, the hundreds of hours of television, came to exist at all.